What's up, everybody? It's Mike here with Simplenursing.com, and hopefully like our little artwork here in the back. It's pretty close enough, right? Looks like I have an underbite kind of. But anyways, I want to make a quick video that talks about the top 3 ways of passing the NCLEX. So I'm going to be breaking down a systematic approach of how to approach the NCLEX, because so often I hear it all the time. We've been doing this for 7 years, and so many resources are out there. Everyone has like a remedy, kind of like a diet plan, right, of how to lose weight. Same thing with the NCLEX. Everyone has like, oh yeah, use this book, listen to this guy's audio lectures on this like Google Drive doc that's floating around, watch a bunch of YouTube videos, get a question bank that everyone uses. So I'm going to be breaking down what has worked for 60,000 students and what hasn't worked. So let me grab my notes real quick and we'll get into it. Now, you've heard the term mind, body, and spirit, right? In the same way, I'm going to be breaking down mind, body, and study plan. So often, especially if you failed the NCLEX and are going to take it your second or third time, people usually find us after they failed like 5 times. I've even helped someone who failed, if you can get this, 17 times. It took her 17 times because she had the wrong mindset. And usually after you fail the second or third time, it's just, the NCLEX is getting inside your head, and you just don't have a solid study plan to fill the knowledge gaps in your brain. So if you failed the NCLEX, fear not. I'm going to be breaking down the 3 steps that you need. So let's get into it. There are 2 ways that everyone studies for the NCLEX, or really any board exam, especially even like your exit exams in nursing school, right? So they either say do a bunch of content or do a bunch of questions. And then you're like a tangled mess, all these resources, so little time, and then you already have job offers and all that stress is like in your face, right? So for the content side, you've already heard it, use the Saunders book, 6th edition, watch a bunch of YouTube videos, share that guy's audio that writes questions for the NCLEX, or even use the NCLEX prep that your school bought you. Or on the question side, we talked about this, use the question bank that everyone's using right now. Or take 100 questions a day, take 1,000 questions a day, who knows, just take a bunch of questions, right? So, do this, do that, take 500 questions a day, whatever. So here are the 4 steps. So step number 1, you guys need a goal. So the goal number, and I don't know if anyone's broken this down to you guys yet, or maybe you've never heard of this before. If you're going the question bank route, I always recommend, the rule of thumb is, and write this down, the goal is to do the 660 rule. So you have to take 600 questions at 60% or higher on a credible question bank. And that's basically the bare ass minimum to basically skimming the trees in terms of passing. Now, I always recommend doing at least 1,200 questions and 70%. That's a really good range. Usually you're in like the 90th percentile. I would say even 99th percentile in passing. Now, if you failed the NCLEX before, most students, they rush to take the NCLEX again. Instead of taking a step back, taking a deep breath and being like, okay, I failed this time. What can I do better the next time? So the goal numbers is what you have to keep in mind. So write it down. Anything north or higher than 1,200 questions at 70%, that's the good range. Many students don't know this, and they end up just studying a bunch of questions or just randomly watching videos or, utilizing a lot of resources that particularly are not even on the NCLEX. So the next part of this is, so the timeline. Generally, to take 1,200 questions should take you anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks. Now, some people have done it in 4 weeks. It really just depends on how much you study. So I always recommend people to go in with the mindset that, this is a long-term marathon type of game, but it's only 6 to 8 weeks. Once you pass the NCLEX, you're done. You never have to take the NCLEX ever again. The worst thing you do every 2 years is just re-up with a bunch of CEUs that are really easy. So I always recommend this duration of time because it prevents burnout and it helps to spread your study method, especially if you guys have failed the NCLEX before. So if you want to write this down, The plan basically breaks down into an AM session and a PM session. So you're doing 4 to 5 days a week of studying, and I'd recommend using a calendar. Just bust one out and write down every single day that you will commit to study. Now, it should be about 4 to 5 hours a day. I don't recommend more than 7 hours a day in terms of studying because, again, guys, it's a marathon. And your brain's going to get burnt out, and you're going to get tired, fatigued, and you're not even going to absorb anything. So, getting back to the AM versus PM session. So, if you have your calendar, I recommend every single box that there's a day, just crossing it out diagonally, putting AM and then PM session. So, in the AM session, you're taking at least 60 questions per day. And the reason I'm saying 60 is because usually students will just take 100 questions when they don't even know how to break down a question. There's a lot of other programs out there that show you how to make a decision based on a question, but a lot of students just rush it and be like, there's no, it's just basically random. There's no method or rhyme or reason to it. So what we do in our question bank we just released for the NCLEX prep is every single question will show you how to break down that NCLEX question with a test taking strategy. So we break it down in 90 seconds. And we also offer a video to go along with that question. So it makes it a little simpler. So in the AM, you're taking 60 questions, and based on what you missed, then in the PM session, you're studying the content that you missed in the AM session, if that makes sense. So for example, we're going to get into this in terms of a self-assessment next. But for example, let's say you're really struggling in pharmacology, right? And let's say there's like 200 questions for pharmacology. So you're taking 60 questions a day. You should be done with that in about 4 days, right? So let's say you miss 20 questions in the AM session. Well, then you're going to be studying the content or just reviewing the videos, even study guides for that particular content in the PM session. And so how that looks is I usually break it up into like 2.5 hours and 2.5 hours. The really golden rule of thumb is you're trying to take a question in 60 seconds or less. And you're probably thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm not that fast. I'm not a gunslinger. I can't do it like that. But it's okay. You're going to get there. And just kind of put it in your mind that you never have to take the NCLEX ever again. We just have to kind of go through this fire and stay consistent, and then we'll pass. So talking about how the NCLEX works here real quick. And then we're going to go into kind of how to set up your study plan and really where to start and what to do with your 4 to 5 day sessions here. So how the NCLEX works. I don't know if anyone's ever explained this to you, but when I was doing live courses with our students, I would explain it like this. So the NCLEX works like the Hunger Games. So if you guys ever seen the Hunger Games, you know that there's basically 12 sectors, right? And every single person gets dropped into one of those 12 sectors. So you can be dropped into the snow, to the desert, the water, the jungle. In that same way, the NCLEX works that way. You can be dropped into pharmacology zone. You can be dropped into leadership, pediatrics, med-surg, psych, community health. You don't have a say on where they drop you. So it makes it really difficult if, let's say you struggle in pediatrics, and so you study all the time in pediatrics, and then you get only pharm questions. Or let's say you are really strong in mental health and community and OB or maternity. And so you're like, yeah, I feel great at that. And then they drop you into something like med-surg, and you're like, oh, crap. So you basically have to fight your way and reach like above passing in the section they drop you in before they kind of move you on to another section, if that makes sense. So once you pass at least 2 or 3 of these sections, then you're above that passing line, and then the computer shuts off. I don't know if anyone's ever explained that to you. So just keep that in mind. So it's going to make a lot more sense when we talk about how to do your self-assessment in terms of setting up your study plan, which you're going to go into right now. So before you actually start studying and start breaking up your days and putting things on the calendar and you have everything formatted and organized, right? You have to ask yourself, you have to ask yourself this one question. Ask yourself, what is your problem area? So if you already know that your problem area is questions, then I would start with the questions. If you know your problem area is content, then I would start with content. Because there's 3 reasons why nursing students fail the NCLEX. It's either they don't know enough content, or they don't know how to break down a question. Like, you can tell someone all day, and I've met students like this all the time, of how the heart works and how the SA node, AV node, and you can break down all the blood flow to the heart. But when it comes to a question, you don't know how to apply that knowledge. So we already figured that out for you and cover that for you guys in our new NCLEX app. So we include, again, the 90-second breakdown for every single question. We made over 1,000, actually 1,500 question videos that break down the question for you. So have no fear. Okay, so how do you know if you have a question problem or a content problem? What if you just don't know? I would recommend starting with an assessment test. So basically, a lot of question banks come like this. They'll have like an assessment test with just a broad range of just mixed and matched questions. I would just take 75 to maybe 150 questions once or twice and really see what you score the lowest in. If you already know that you have a content problem, and I always recommend starting with, your top 3 content areas. So if you have a pen and paper, or something to write with, maybe you want to put in your phone, I'd recommend putting down your top 3 content areas. So for example, pharmacology is like the #1 content area. Everyone hates pharmacology. And it's pretty good news because we have 200 videos that break down the top 200 drugs on the NCLEX and exactly the key terms and key points you need to know to pass in the NCLEX. Trust me, I've seen a lot of resources out there and a lot of YouTube videos that give you so much more information that you don't need. And trust me, if you've been one of those students that has passed nursing school with high grades but just can't pass the NCLEX, then these kind of videos and this kind of content is for you. Because typically I've seen a lot of students, they get 4.0s in nursing school and they know just all the information. But on the NCLEX, you don't need to know all the information. You just need to know the stuff that they want you to know to pass, which we've included inside of our videos. We actually hired about 3 different PhD instructors that write questions for the NCLEX, and we basically stay up to date on the need to knows. So start with the top 3. Pharmacology is typically #1. #2 is just med-surg because that's a huge behemoth. Everyone struggles with med-surg. Or maybe it's not med-surg. Maybe it's mental health or pediatrics or maternity or something else. But I'd kind of loosely jot down your top 3 and start there. So how to do the study plan, which is basically step number 3. We kind of touched on this, but let's kind of dive into more detail here. So the hardest part is getting started and keeping to a plan. So I kind of liken it to like a diet plan or a weight loss plan, right? You can have a personal trainer kind of write out, oh yeah, you should do cardio, you should lift weights, you should eat this many calories. But actually doing it and committing to it is the hardest part. So once again, as I said before, I'd recommend cutting your day up into 2 different sessions. It kind of gives yourself a little bit of kind of mental clarity, as well as kind of pacing yourself. And the second thing I would recommend is try to pick a study zone. Don't go somewhere where you're really comfortable, like your house or somewhere where you're going to get distracted. That's the hardest part. If you can take at least the questions, or maybe just the AM session, or maybe just the PM session, somewhere where your mind is more activated, like even a coffee shop or even like a library or even like a friend's house or somewhere else. I've even known students that get like a hotel room for a week and, no distractions. They're able to kind of just dive in, nerd out, and really just get started because the hardest part is getting into that routine. So be very forgiving in the beginning. And once you get into that routine, you'll find your groove, you'll get some momentum, and then, you start building on that. So once you have your momentum, start on your top 3 hardest topics like pharm, med-surg, mental health. And I'd recommend, again, like I touched on this, taking 60 questions per day. Remember, the goal is to get about 1,200 questions. So if you're at 1,200 questions, or let's say you're at 900 questions and your score's in the 50s, and you're like, oh man, but my NCLEX is next week. Guys, I'd recommend not taking the NCLEX. It's okay to slow down, take a breather, change your date, guys. I'd much rather you have, patch up the holes in your knowledge gaps. It's kind of like jumping out of a plane, right? Patch up the holes in your parachute so you don't fall to your death. Who cares if you have to, push your test date out for a week or 2? As long as you pass and you're done with the NCLEX that first time. Worst thing you can do is rush it. And even though your numbers aren't good, and even though your numbers will say, if you're scoring anything less than 60% on your mean average, it typically means you're not going to pass the NCLEX. And I see students do this all the time. So just keep that in mind. You have to get your numbers in. So make sure you put it on a Post-it, put it on a note card, 1,200 questions, 70% or higher. If you get 60% or higher, that's okay. But again, that's like the bare ass minimum. So, okay, I know I'm getting way ahead of myself. I'm pretty excited about this stuff. Okay, so the AM and PM sessions. Here's how I'd recommend taking questions. Now, you guys have probably all taken questions on an app, right? And you're just, take a question and then it flips over or it scrolls down and you look immediately at the rationale. So let me ask you this. When you're taking the actual NCLEX, are they going to show you the rationale? Well, the answer is no. You're basically just taking questions until you finish or until the computer shuts off, correct? So I always recommend students don't look at the rationale until you take 20 questions. So, for example, if you're having an hour to take questions, I'd recommend breaking it up into 20 questions of actually taking questions straight through. It should take you about 20, 25 minutes. And then using the other part of that hour, like 40 minutes, to look at the rationales and kind of brush up on your knowledge. Now, you're taking 60 questions in that AM session, right? All the questions that you're missing, you're putting down on a piece of paper or you're typing it out, and you're writing down the topics that you missed. So that in the PM session, you're going to go through and you're going to watch videos or use our study guides. I'd recommend, or using an NCLEX book, but I'd recommend using the study guides that we have because we extract all the information that the NCLEX will test you on. So when you're in that kind of, content area inside the PM session, I'd recommend using one, well, this is not computer paper, but using one piece of computer paper and use it for, as your cheat sheet. So trying to put as much information really tiny through the videos or through the study guides that we provide and putting it really tiny on one page. So for example, let's say pharmacology is, your worst subject. I'd recommend putting only the need to know information as tiny as you can so that you'll have one piece of paper on the go to be able to review for the next step. Because I don't know if you guys know this, but you need to at least see information 5 to 7 times before it's inside your brain. So how cool is this? You know the content that you missed because you just took some questions on it in the AM session. The PM session, you don't have a huge thing of notes or a bunch of flashcards everywhere. All you're doing is filling out really tiny, cardiac medications or psychiatric meds. Or lithium, here's the key points for lithium, really small. Then you can fold this up and take it on the go. So your second and third week are going to be a lot easier because you're going to have just this really skinny notebook that you can just go and have those light session study days where all you're doing now is just reviewing 5 to 7 times. And I'd recommend taking it to the park, taking it to the beach, take it even probably not to the movies, but you know what I mean? Maybe even to the mall. Go out, get some fresh air, take this stuff with you, and it feels like you're not even studying when you actually are studying. That's the coolest part. The other key point I wanted to talk about was, let's see here. Yeah, so you're taking on the go, blah, 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 blah. Okay, the questions. Okay, a lot of students ask me this. You know, they're like, should I use a bunch of resources? Should I use this book, these audio lectures, this? Guys, the biggest thing that I see a lot of students fail, trust me, I've seen a lot of students, and, you know, they all have the same problem. 60,000 students in 7 years always have too many resources. I'd always recommend trying to use one question bank. Once you get at least 1,000 questions, or maybe even 1,500 questions out of that one question bank, that's the best way to test and track your progress. A lot of students are like, well, I don't want to spend the money to buy a question bank. Well, guys, it's the NCLEX, dude. Like, you've been preparing 2 years of your whole life for this. What's $100 just to pass your NCLEX, right? And the coolest part, our new NCLEX program, it's significantly less than a lot of the other big players out there. But I recommend, even if you don't go with our program, that you use one question bank to track your progress. And once again, guys, anything below 60% is failing. So once again, to wrap this up for step number 3, is let's say in the pharmacology section for the first 2 weeks, you're studying 4 to 5 days a week. That's about 10 days for pharmacology. I think that's a pretty good time. You're taking 60 questions a day. So it should go, take a bunch of questions, 60 a day. You're taking 20 questions straight through. Don't look at the rationales. And then the reason for that, guys, is because that's how the NCLEX works. The worst thing you can do is be there on the NCLEX day, and then your mind's going to start going through muscle memory, thinking that, you know, I get a question, and then I get a break. Your mind's like, oh yeah, I get to see if I got it right or wrong. Usually when you're on the test day, it's like, take a bunch of questions, and then your mind's thinking, oh, I get a break. So your mind gets significantly fatigued after the first few questions. And then even if you're on question 75 and you're waiting for the computer to shut off and it doesn't, then you even have more fatigue and then more anxiety, and that gets in your brain too. So trust me, I've seen this a lot. Again, the AM session, you're taking questions, 20 questions straight through, and then using that 40 minutes within that hour to kind of look at your rationales and jot down the topics that you need to review during your content session. So remember, the PM session of that same day, you're reviewing the videos that we have, the study guides that we have, or some type of NCLEX books that may or may not have the highlighted information for the NCLEX. So that's how you use your resources productively. Now, the last part of this is the review part that we kind of touched on. So let's say you take all the pharmacology questions within one question bank. And now you have you're like, I have 5 other days in like this 2-week time frame. Well, that part is you're writing down all the information. That's your reviewing part. Let's say you watched all the videos that you could watch in our video vault for the pharmacology section, which are based on the NCLEX. And now you have this beautiful kind of 1-pager. Maybe it's 3 pages. I don't know. You're going to fold that up and you're going to review that 5 to 7 times. You can review it more. There's no rules that say you have to do only 7 times. I've even seen a student do it like 20 times because they really wanted to master pharmacology. So you can carry this around as long as you review it. Then, once you reviewed this, I'd recommend taking the questions again just to kind of capstone it and, run through it to see if you retain that information. That's basically step number 4 in terms of reassessment. So, pharmacology, you've taken all 200 questions, which 200 questions is pretty much a standard in all the question banks. Let's say you reviewed all the information in about 2 weeks, and then you're still scoring low. on the actual when you retake the test again. So there's a few issues that could come up, and I can basically diagnose it real quick. This is basically step number 4, our reassessment. So I hear it all the time. Students are taking a bunch of questions, but just can't get over that 60% benchmark. Typically, if that's the case, it's usually one of 3 issues, or it could be 2, or it could be all 3. The first thing is either you have massive test anxiety for some reason, which if you actually do have legit test anxiety, you can easily go to your primary care provider and basically your doctor and get, they usually put you on a beta blocker, which lowers the heart rate and kind of takes the edge off of your anxiety. Now, it's not an anxiolytic like Xanax or something like that, but lowering your heart rate usually brings everything down. You can get diagnosed with it, and you can get special accommodations with the NCLEX itself. The second thing, if you're not scoring above a benchmark, either you're rushing through the questions or you're rushing through the content. So, guys, remember, please take your time on this. This 6 weeks is meant for you to focus on you. Remember, you just have to make one basket. So take a deep breath. And just know that this 6 weeks is just the capstone of the 2 years of work that you've been trying so hard. So don't rush it. I see students a lot taking, just randomly choosing questions or just randomly watching videos. We don't want that here. We want a laser-focused approach to passing this NCLEX. We just have to make this one basketball basket in the hoop, and once it's done, we never have to take this, NCLEX ever again. So try your best not to rush it. Now, if you're not rushing it and you're saying, Mike, I'm doing everything I can. I reviewed all the content on my little thingy 5 to 7 times, and I'm watching your videos of how to break down the question. Then typically it's a mindset thing or a body thing. Remember, at the beginning of this video, I talked about mind, body, and study plan. So let's talk a little bit about how your mindset should be going into the NCLEX. And if you have brain fog and fatigue and just can't focus, you can't find the motivation, I'm going to show you some hacks on how to do that. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you need help finding a NCLEX program, please join us and please consider simplenursing.com/NCLEX. We have about 1,500 questions as well as 300 study guides, and we're the only question bank app that actually has videos infused into the rationale. So thanks again for watching. Please leave your comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.